Quit being so weird, Ethan. Nobody's gonna deal with you like that. That was the first time I heard my mom say that to me. I was 6 years old, and that sentence stuck in my head like an echo that's lasted for decades. For a long time, I believed her. I thought there really was something wrong with me. I grew up trying to fit in, trying to be less weird, more normal. I kept forcing myself into molds that felt too tight on the inside, even though I didn't have the words for it back then. Now, at 34, I've started looking at everything with fresh eyes, and I realized something that completely threw me. Maybe, in that moment, my mom wasn't just talking about me. Maybe without even realizing it, she was talking about herself. That thought wouldn't leave me alone. I started paying closer attention to her. I spent 2 weeks noticing her patterns, her repetitive gestures, the way she went quiet. And then it all started to click. I gave her a simple 10-question screening test. It came back positive. My mom, the person I'd always thought of as odd, very likely shows clear signs of autism. And that took me straight back to my own story. What if? Me too. That question hit me hard, because, thinking about it, I've always been different, since I was a kid. And honestly, I'm still exactly the same as I was at 4 years old. I remember my childhood and teenage years with an almost unsettling clarity. Nothing about me has changed. The quirks, the discomforts, the routines, they're all still there. I've always been obsessed with details. I can never focus on the big picture. Change throws me completely off balance, and making eye contact has always been a huge effort. I spent years practicing it. I can do it now, but the discomfort is still there, quietly buzzing in the background. I've been listening to the same playlist for 21 years, in the exact same order. I know every song by heart, and I never get tired of them. They give me a sense of safety, of predictability. I've also never been able to hold a job for very long. It's like the world keeps demanding a version of me that I can sustain for more than a little while. Living like that has been exhausting. That's why I decided to dig deeper. Because I want to understand who I am. Because maybe, for the first time in my life, I'm ready to know. I've started the process of getting a formal diagnosis. I've begun cognitive behavioral therapy, and I really want to change this pattern. But before anything else, I had to go back in time. Revisit my story with a different perspective. See myself with more compassion. And maybe accept that I was never weird at all. I was just different. And that's okay. I always thought my mom was strange. Even as a kid, I could tell there was something different about her. But back then, I didn't have the words for it. She was intense. Very rigid about routines, methodical about everything. If something broke the pattern, it would throw her off completely. I remember one time I tried to help set the table for dinner. I grabbed the plates and set the silverware in a different way. Don't even know why. She stopped, looked at it, took a deep breath, and said in that tense voice of hers, "Ethan, the forks go on the left. Always on the left. It's not hard." I must have been about 7. That moment stuck with me. I was just trying to help, but it felt like my help only got in the way. Another time, on a Sunday, my dad suggested out of the blue that we go out for lunch. A new restaurant, all the way across town. She froze, literally, crossed her arms, said she wasn't hungry, that it wasn't a good day. And when he kept pushing, she raised her voice. "Cat, that's not how you do things. Meals need to be planned." I already thawed the meat. It wasn't about the restaurant. It was about the plan being broken. She also had her unshakable daily rituals. The yellow mug for her morning coffee. The same radio program at exactly 7 a.m. Her slippers placed at the side of the bed, always on the left. One day, I tripped over her slippers by accident and kicked them out of place without realizing it. She found them later and grumbled all day someone moved them. That's not how I left them. I don't like it when people mess with my things. At school, I'd see other moms laughing, telling jokes, chatting away. My mom was always the last one to arrive, avoided small talk, and stood off to the side, just watching. If someone tried to start a conversation with her, she was curt, short. Like it took real effort to engage. She'd say things like, "I don't like wasting time with shallow people. Small talk drives me crazy. Why talk if you don't have anything important to say?" Now, with more maturity and a little research, I realize she wasn't strange. She was different. And she was probably living in a constant state of sensory and social overload without knowing it, without ever being understood. But for me, as her kid, for many years, she just seemed difficult. Too demanding, controlling. Recently, after I started looking into my own possible diagnosis, I decided to watch my mom more closely. I spent 2 weeks with her, paying attention to every detail, not judging, just seeing her with fresh eyes. And it was like I'd been blind all these years. She does everything exactly the same way, every single day. Wakes up at the same time, drinks the same coffee, sits in the same chair. When she has to deviate from her routine, you can see the discomfort all over her face. And she has very fixed interests. Talks about the same topics, tells the same stories, and sometimes doesn't even notice if the other person is engaged or not. But what stood out the most was her lack of flexibility. If something changes, a plan, a route, a way of doing things, it's like her whole world freezes, and that felt very familiar. After those 2 weeks, I couldn't unsee the signs. It was like they'd been there all along, and I was only now able to recognize them. The rigidity, the unshakable routine, the literal way she took conversations, the way she'd get lost in her own thoughts, the social anxiety disguised as practicality, the hypersensitivity, the way she avoided touch, noise, anything unexpected. One day, I sat next to her on the couch and gently asked, "Mom, have you ever heard about autism in adult women?" She frowned, stayed quiet, then let out a nervous laugh. "Ooh, come on, Ethan. That internet stuff. These days everything's autism." But I pushed a little, told her there was a quick 10-question screening test, said it wasn't diagnostic, just indicative, and I asked if she'd take it. She agreed, half laughing, half curious. I pulled out my phone and read the questions one by one. She answered fast, without hesitation. Yes, 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 again. Out of the 10 questions, she scored positive on 8. She went silent, gave a little awkward smile, crossed her arms, and said, "Oh, that probably comes out positive for everybody, right?" But I saw it. I saw the unease in her eyes. Like something had shifted inside her. Like, For the first time, an explanation made too much sense to ignore. That night, she was quieter than usual, and before going to bed, she stopped by my room, knocked lightly, and asked if I really am autistic. "Do you think that changes anything?" I said, "It doesn't change who you are, Mom, but maybe it would help explain why you've always felt so different." She didn't say anything, but for the first time, she didn't change the subject. Questing. And in that moment, a question started echoing in my head. Has my mom been autistic this whole time, and nobody ever noticed? Growing up with her was confusing. She seemed harsh, distant, often explosive. But now, with this new lens, I can't help but wonder how many moms have been labeled cold, neglectful, or bossy, when really they were just trying to survive in a world that never considered their differences. My mom married an autistic man. They've been together for over 20 years. Maybe she felt understood by him, even if she didn't know why. Maybe she recognized herself in the silences, in the struggles. There was one day everything got out of control and she exploded. It was a Saturday morning. I must have been about 10. My dad decided we should go out for breakfast to a new bakery that had just opened nearby. A cute little place with lots of different options, and of course, it was packed. He said it with excitement, like it was a treat. "Let's change things up a bit, hun. Breakfast out today." My mom froze on the spot. Looked at him like he'd just told her the world was ending. "What do you mean, breakfast out?" she asked, her voice low but tense. He kept it light. "It's just breakfast. It'll be fun. And you won't have to cook." She stood still for a few seconds. Then she said, "I didn't go out for that. I've got bread. I've got the coffee I like. I've got everything I need right here." We went anyway. In the car, she didn't say a word. I knew that silence it was like a rubber band stretched to its limit. You could feel it was about to snap. When we got there were no tables left, just seats at the counter. The lights were bright. The noise was overwhelming. Cups, plates, kids crying, people laughing too loud. She walked in, took one look round, and just froze. "I want to go home." My dad tried to convince her, said it would calm down soon, that we could wait. That's when she snapped. "Don't you get it? I don't work like this. I don't like this. I can't handle people, or the mess, or all this noise." People turned to look. I felt the floor drop out from under me. She walked out fast, almost running, and stood outside, her eyes full of tears. We drove home in silence, back. Then I thought she was just overreacting. Now, looking back, I see she was having a classic sensory overload. A meltdown. The new environment, the noise, the bright lights, the break in her routine, it was all too much for her nervous system. But no one understood, not even her, E.T. It was easier to call it a bad temper, or adult tantrum. But now I know it was autism. Invisible, unnamed, unacknowledged. She used to tell me about her teenage years, the school friends, the weekend parties. I'd always thought my mom had been normal when she was young. She even dated for different guys before meeting my dad. She went out a lot, laughed at her own stories, and honestly, she seemed pretty social. For the longest time, that was my mental argument against the idea she might be autistic. No way. She had friends, boyfriends, she danced. That can't be autism. But once I started digging into my own story, I realized autism doesn't always look the way you expect. I began going back over her memories of those years, asking questions carefully, trying to really understand how she felt in those moments. And little by little, what once looked like sociability started to reveal something else entirely. A massive sensory and emotional overload, disguised as adaptation. She told me she always felt anxious before social events, that she had to rehearse conversations in her head, run through possible questions and answers, that she'd feel completely drained afterward, and that many times she'd rather have stayed home, but went out anyway because that's what everyone did. One day she admitted, "I felt like I was in the party, but out of place, always pretending to be someone else." Her relationships, for example, never lasted long. She said she liked the idea of being with someone, but the closeness made her uncomfortable. She avoided touch, felt weird when a boyfriend wanted to hold her in public. She thought it was some flaw she had to get over. But really, it was sensory and emotional hypersensitivity. She was constantly balancing the effort to fit in with the fear of being found out as weird. That's when it hit me. My mom's teenage years may have looked normal to everyone else, but on the inside, they were a battlefield, a constant attempt to camouflage, and that's when I understood something important. Yes, you can be autistic and still look normal to the outside world, but that appearance comes at a cost. And so many women, like my mom, have paid dearly for it. They've spent their whole lives performing neurotypical behavior, while blaming themselves for never feeling truly comfortable, accepted, or enough. Now, I see the teenager my mom once was in a completely different light, not as well adjusted, but as masked, exhausted, and deeply lonely, even when surrounded by people. What I once labeled as quirkiness, I now recognize as traits that went unnoticed for decades, just like in so many other women on the spectrum, women who learned to mask, to imitate neurotypical behavior, to adapt, and who ended up burning out in the process. This discovery about my mom doesn't answer everything, but it opens a door, and that door helps me look at myself with more compassion. To Koki. If I thought my mom was a little odd, my dad was in a whole other category. A kind of silence that felt heavy, a way of living that always seemed tuned to a different frequency. For a long time, I thought he was just harsh, dry, lacking tact. But as I learned more about the autism spectrum, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. My dad has the kind of profile that today might be described as autism level 1. Support needs 3. Or maybe level 2. Support needs 1. Hard to say. But the traits have been there, loud and clear, all along. Starting a conversation is extremely hard for him. And it's not just shyness. It's like he genuinely doesn't know how to begin. We can spend the entire day together without him saying a word, unless someone speaks to him first. And even then, his answers are short, straight to the point. Yes, no, okay. Usually just about practical stuff. Never feelings. Never, how was your day? When he does decide to talk, it's almost always about the same topics. Old radio transmitters, how diesel engines work, or tiny technical details from documentaries he's watched dozens of times. One time, He spent nearly 40 minutes explaining exactly how our satellite dish works, even though I told him I already got it. Sarcasm, jokes, subtle changes in tone, they go right over his head. I remember a lunch when my aunt joked, "Careful with Paul's rice today. It's fancy." It was just a comment about the extra seasoning. But my dad froze, got pale, and asked, "Something's wrong. I shouldn't have used onions." He took it literally, and was visibly uncomfortable the rest of the day. Hints are completely useless, but if my mom says someone should take out the trash, he'll just keep watching TV, as if she were making a random observation. She has to be direct. "Paul, take the trash out now." That he understands. And if he doesn't get what's being said, whether because of background noise, vague wording, or figurative language, he just disconnects. He stops looking, shifts his attention somewhere else, sometimes even leaves the room without a word. It's like the mental effort overloads him, and he needs to step away just to breathe. The social world is like a language he never learned. And for years, we thought he was rude or cold, when in reality, he was just trying to survive in a territory that made no sense to him. Ever since I was a kid, I noticed how badly he handled loud noises, chaos, or sudden changes in routine. If we had to go somewhere unexpectedly, he'd get extremely anxious, sweating, pacing back and forth, but no one ever questioned it. It was just his way. My dad doesn't have friends, he never did. Not as a kid, not as a teenager, not now. When we ask if he misses it, he just says, "I don't need friends. I've got you guys." But honestly, no matter what he says, there's always been a certain loneliness around him, quiet, invisible. Over the years, coworkers have described him as reserved, keeps to himself, too private. Some even called him weird. He got along with some people well enough, but it was always served too. I never saw him invite anyone over, go out for coffee, or share an unguarded laugh. He'd go, do what needed to be done, and come home. Always the same. At home, he was physically present, but mostly silent, sitting in his spot on the couch, watching the same programs, repeating the same gestures. Sometimes, he seemed completely detached from what was going on around him. While the rest of us were talking, laughing, arguing, or sorting out life, he'd be there, quiet, still unreachable. I remember one time we were getting ready for my sister's birthday. Everyone was helping, laughing, rushing around, and he was sitting on the couch, looking through a radio parts catalog. He didn't even look up. My mom, frustrated, asked, "Aren't you going to help with anything, Taya?" And he said, completely serious, "You didn't ask me to." He doesn't read social cues, doesn't pick up emotional context, doesn't take initiative when it involves interacting with others. There's an invisible wall between him and the rest of the world. Not because he doesn't love us, but because the way he experiences life is just different. For the longest time, I thought he was cold, indifferent. But now I see, that was simply his way of existing in the world. The only way he knew. With us, daily life was functional. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't warm either. He was never the hugging type, never the "how are you feeling" type. But if I needed something practical, fixing a computer, troubleshooting a technical problem, he was there, precise. focused. Now I wonder, what was it like for two neurodivergent people to be married, without either of them knowing it, for 20 years? Maybe that's why so many things in our house felt jammed. Emotions stuck in our throats, half-finished conversations, too many unspoken rules, that constant fear of saying or doing the wrong thing. Looking at them now, with more empathy, I can see they were both doing the best they could, with the tools they had. But I also think about how many wounds could have been avoided if there had been understanding sooner. If someone had said, "Hey, maybe this is autism," and not just coldness, lack of affection, or rigidity. They're not bad people. They're neurodivergent. The difference is, no one ever saw them that way. Since I was very young, I knew I was different. I can remember moments with an almost photographic clarity going back to when I was 4. I remember the smell of my first notebook, the texture of a shirt I hated wearing, the songs that played at my grandmother's house. They're not vague memories. They're vivid, detailed, like they've been stored in high definition, ready to be accessed at any time. Over time, I realized it wasn't just that. There were things I didn't always had that other people didn't, like the way I would repeat movements with my hands, especially when I was anxious or excited. As a kid, I'd open and close my fingers tightly, as if I were trying to push energy out of my body. Sometimes I'd flap my arms so fast that my shirt would ride up. My mom would say, "Stop doing that, you're gonna look crazy to other people." When I sat down, my legs never stopped moving. I'd bounce one or both of them at the same time, like there was a metronome inside me. There was a phase when I'd grind my teeth without even noticing, especially at night, or when I got frustrated about something. I once cracked a dental filling from clenching my jaw so hard. As a kid, they called it a habit. Some teachers even spoke with pity. It's just nerves. Later, as a teenager, I started hiding it. I'd cross my arms over my hands so no one could see my fingers moving. I'd force myself to stop bouncing my legs during meetings or in public, but the tension would just build up inside me like a pressure cooker. And when I was alone, it would all come out at once. Looking back now, I understand. This wasn't just kid stuff. It wasn't a phase. It was my way of regulating how I felt, of organizing myself internally when the world felt loud, unpredictable, overwhelming. It was like breathing, and no one should have to be ashamed of breathing. Routine has always been my shield. I needed to do the same things, in the same way, every day. Any change, no matter how small, like switching the side of the bed I slept on, the order of the silverware, or the time of a meal, would throw me off completely. There was a time when, if my mom called me to lunch before the usual hour, I'd just refuse. I'm not hungry yet. But it wasn't about hunger. It was about control, about predictability. Eye contact was always torment for me. As a child, I avoided it at all costs. I remember a third-grade teacher grabbing my chin and saying, "Look me in the eyes when I'm talking to you." I froze. Quote, I felt like if I looked, I would crumble inside, as if I were naked, vulnerable, pierced by something I couldn't name. As a teenager, I developed techniques. I started looking between people's eyebrows, pretending to make eye contact. Sometimes I'd fixate on a spot on their cheek, or the bridge of their nose. It worked, to a point. But in more intense conversations, the discomfort would come roaring back. My brain felt split between trying to understand what the person was saying and keeping my focus on the right spot on their face, like it was a constant performance. And if the conversation dragged on, my eyes would start to burn. I'd feel drained, with time and a lot of effort. I trained myself to manage this. In job interviews, meetings, presentations, I knew I had to look normal. I practiced in front of the mirror, studied videos, observed how other people did it. And now, technically, I can maintain eye contact. But the truth, it still bothers me. It's not natural for me. I feel like I'm violating a very private space, as if a spotlight is shining directly into my eyes. It's exhausting, it's invasive, and even though it looks simple to others, for me it's still an invisible barrier, one of those things nobody sees, but you feel with your whole body. One thing that's never changed, my playlist. I've been listening to the same songs for 21 years. Literally, about 50 tracks, always in the same order. I know exactly which one comes next, before the previous one even ends. Each song is tied to a specific memory, and no matter how many times people tell me, listen to something new, expand your taste, this is my comfort zone. It's predictable, safe. I haven't gotten sick of it in 2 decades. I see no reason to change. Now, a harder part. Work, I've never been able to stay stable in a job. I've gone through dozens different areas, roles, companies, and the cycle. It always repeats. I start excited. I get deeply involved. I learn quickly, dive into the details, become obsessed with delivering everything perfectly. I get praised, sometimes even promoted in the first few months. But then, something happens. It could be a new manager, a department reorganization, a new teammate, or even just a change in the office layout. And suddenly, what felt like control turns into chaos. I get disoriented. My routines break. My productivity drops. I start making small mistakes, barely noticeable to others, but intolerable to me. And then there are the social conflicts. I've never understood workplace social dynamics very well. I don't pick up on sarcasm, irony, passive aggressiveness. I've been scolded for talking back, when I was just being literal. I've been told I seem cold, when I honestly just didn't know how to express what I was feeling. Work social events make me anxious for days. Group lunches are a silent nightmare. The noise, the overlapping conversations, the obligation to maintain eye contact and smile at the right moments. It drains me. I've lost jobs for not fitting in. I've quit jobs because I couldn't keep pretending anymore. And when I feel everything falling apart, I run, I quit. Or, if I don't quit, I get let go. And then I start over. Again, another resume, another interview, another attempt to adapt. And each new round leaves me more tired, more insecure, more frustrated with myself. I remember one job where I lasted less than 4 months. It was an administrative position at a small clinic. Everything was fine at first. I arrived early every day, organized the physical and digital files meticulously, created a scheduling control system no one had thought of before. My boss praised my dedication, my exemplary discipline, but then, one of the receptionists went on leave. They put me at the front desk temporarily. The pace was intense, phones ringing constantly, people talking loudly, questions coming at me all at once, and I froze. I'd start sweating, forget what I was doing, stumble over my words. One day, I confused two patients with similar names, and the appointments got mixed up. After that, I could feel the way the team looked at me change. Nobody said anything directly, but the atmosphere was different. They started making jokes about my rigidity, laughing when I asked for quiet so I could concentrate. One coworker even said, "You're smart, but it's like you live on another planet." 2 weeks later, I quit. I said it was for personal reasons, but inside, I felt broken. Like I had failed once again at being someone people could work with. For a long time, I thought it was laziness, lack of focus, immaturity. But now, I'm starting to understand. Maybe the problem was never a lack of effort. Maybe I was just trying to survive in environments that weren't built for me. Now, at 34, digging into all of this, I can see it's not being dramatic. It's not laziness. It's not an excuse. There's a pattern. There are clear traits. There's a story that needs to be understood, because getting here has not been easy. For the longest time, I didn't even realize there was a name for what I felt, or the way my brain worked. I just thought I was weird, awkward, someone who always had to study people, mimic them, rehearse what to say, and still never quite hit the right note. It took years of silent struggle and failed attempts to fix myself before I started asking, what if I'm not broken? What if I'm that word, neurodivergent, cracked something open for me. I started digging in, watching videos, reading people's stories, taking online screening tests. And the more I learned, the more it all started to click. It felt like I'd been working on a puzzle since I was a kid, but with the wrong pieces in the box. Getting an autism diagnosis as an adult, though, that's a whole different challenge. Most people still picture autism as something you see in kids, usually boys, with obvious behaviors. Adults, like me, verbal, sensitive, introspective, but able to appear functional in certain situations, slip under the radar. We're invisible cost. And in Boston, there's an extra layer, the cost and logistics. A proper evaluation with a psychologist or neuropsychologist who knows adult autism can run into the thousands. And good luck getting full coverage from insurance. On top of that, the waitlist for an adult assessment can stretch for months, sometimes over a year. There are a handful of specialists who focus on what's called late diagnosed autism, but they're the exception, not the norm. Then there's the second hurdle, unprepared professionals. The first time I tried, I booked an appointment with a well-reviewed psychiatrist in my insurance network. I showed up with a notebook full of details, symptoms since childhood, job struggles, sensory issues, routines, rigidity. Before I could even finish my first sentence, she cut me off. Well, you work, right? You have friends, you're in therapy. Then it's probably not autism. People who are really autistic can't have relationships. I just sat there, stunned. I tried to explain about the stimming, the meltdowns, the crushing exhaustion after socializing. She waved it off. That's just anxiety. Very common. Autism has to show up in childhood and be more obvious. I left that office with a knot in my throat, feeling like a fraud. Was I overreacting, making this up? Just trying to excuse my weirdness with a label? On my second try, I went to a neurologist. I barely got halfway through my story before he said, "You went to college, got a degree. Then why would you think you're autistic?" These days everyone wants to be on the spectrum. That one stung even more. As if my pain was a trend. As if the years I've spent masking and pushing through somehow erased what it cost me. The third time, I found a psychologist who specializes in adult neurodevelopment. She didn't interrupt. She listened for almost an hour. She asked thoughtful questions about my childhood, my family, my body, my way of thinking. She wasn't trying to check boxes. She was trying to understand me. I told her about my routines, my challenges, my silent meltdowns, my rigidity, my hyperfocus, my social fatigue. She took it all in with genuine care. For the first time, I felt seen, without having to justify myself. I didn't feel like a burden or a drama queen. And then she said the words that shifted everything. "That makes sense. Let's explore this carefully." Being dismissed, especially by someone who's supposed to help, cuts deep. But being believed, that's like taking your first real breath in years. Right now, I'm still in the process. Tests, interviews, gathering reports. Working toward a formal diagnosis is its own kind of journey, because it's not just about paperwork or scoring on a test. It's a deep dive into your own history. It's looking at yourself with new eyes, questioning old beliefs, and realizing that what you've spent years calling flaws or quirks might actually be part of your wiring, part of who you are. It was along this path that I found cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. CBT has been helping me put names to patterns that once felt chaotic. For example, when a plan changes at the last minute, and my reaction is extreme irritation, mental confusion, emotional collapse before. I just thought I was overreacting. Now, I'm learning to identify what's happening in my body, in my mind, and in my automatic thoughts. It's not easy. In fact, sometimes it's exhausting. The first time I heard about CBT, I'll admit, I thought, there's no way this is going to work for me. It seemed too technical, too rational, like an instruction manual for something that had always felt untamable. But the deeper I sank into my daily struggles, the more I realized I needed structure, a map, and that's why I decided to give it a try. CBT isn't magic, it's method, it's observation, and it's a lot of work. The idea is simple: identify automatic thoughts that trigger emotions and behaviors, and, over time, reframe those connections. It sounds simple, but for someone who's spent 30 years inside rigid patterns, fixed routines, and deeply ingrained insecurities, it's like learning to walk all over again. We started with specific situations. For example, my discomfort with sudden changes of plan. If a meeting runs late, if the bus doesn't arrive on time, if someone invites me out at the last minute, I freeze. Anxiety, anger, confusion. I had to start recording everyday situations. Why did I feel so upset when I had to switch desks at work? Why do I refuse to eat from any plate that isn't that thick-rimmed blue one? Why do I repeat the same song 5 times before I can sleep? Small things, but they carry a huge weight in how I function. Through CBT, I began mapping these triggers, understanding that my mind seeks control as a way to protect itself. And little by little, We started building coping strategies and new ways of handling these moments, not to fix myself, but to understand myself, to find a more balanced way of existing respecting my limits and the limits of the world around me. Another thing we began to work on in therapy was eye contact. I had already developed tricks to get around it. Looking between someone's eyebrows, at their nose, or focusing on a spot on their cheek. Sometimes it worked, but inside, there was always discomfort. One day, my therapist asked me directly, "What exactly do you feel when someone looks you in the eyes?" It took me a while to answer. I sat in silence, trying to find a word that could hold that feeling. "It's like I'm too exposed," I said. "What do you mean by exposed?" She pressed gently, like they're seeing inside me, like the person's eyes are a light that's too bright, and I have nowhere to hide. She nodded, wrote something down, and then said something that stayed with me ever since. "You've spent your whole life building strategies to protect yourself. Now you're learning that you can choose when to show yourself and when to pull back. It's not about forcing it. It's about knowing you have that choice." That hit me, because I'd always thought eye contact was a social obligation, one of those invisible rules I tried to follow to seem normal. I'd never considered that I could choose, that looking away wasn't disrespect. Sometimes, it was self-preservation. Now, I'm still practicing. But I do it with a different perspective. I don't fake it anymore. When I meet someone's gaze, I know I'm really there. And when I look away, I'm still there, just honoring my limits. That simple understanding took a huge weight off my shoulders. It's not about learning to look. It's about allowing myself to feel and to choose. Rigidity is another focus area. I've always been the kind of person who repeats the same gestures, follows the same routines, eats the same foods, and that's finite's part of who I am. But CBT has been helping me notice when that rigidity gets in my way, when it stops me from trying something new, or from adapting to a simple social situation. The goal isn't to erase this part of me, it's to gain flexibility, to learn that I can have a plan B, and that it doesn't have to feel like a threat. The process is slow, very slow, and, above all, it takes courage to see myself truthfully, without masks, without the trained social persona, without that constant effort to seem normal. It's a daily exercise in self-listening, asking myself, is this really a problem, or is it just my different way of functioning? If it's just different, can I learn to accept it, instead of correcting it all the time? That might be the most delicate part of the journey, realizing that a diagnosis doesn't come to limit you, but to free you. The simple act of investigating has already been transformative. It's like giving a name to a feeling that's been with you for decades. Like recognizing your own story in a new light. More than a label, the diagnosis, if it comes, will be a compass. A way to care for myself better, to understand my limits, to stop comparing myself to everyone else all the time. An important step in the journey of self-knowledge and acceptance. Kak, Tranti Ding Duen. You know what's really cruel? When you're labeled as high-functioning or mild autistic, people assume you don't need help. On the outside, I was fine. I always looked fine. I said good morning, smiled at the right times, got my work done, cracked jokes. People would look at me and say, "You, autistic, you don't seem like it." And for a long time, that messed with my head. Because I used to think autism was something you could see, something obvious, something severe. And since I could fake it well enough to blend in, I started doubting myself. But your body doesn't lie. Inside, everything was chaos. It was like being on stage 24/7, performing a role I never auditioned for. No intermission, no backstage, no chance to breathe. Wearing that social mask every single day came at a huge cost. I'd smile, but my jaw would ache from clenching it so hard. I'd hear people talking, but barely process their words. Some days, after just a few simple social interactions, I'd come home, sit in the dark, and not move for hours. Completely drained. That exhaustion has a name. Autistic burnout. And it doesn't come from being autistic, it comes from trying not to look autistic. Sounds backwards, right? But the world taught me early on that the goal was to blend in, to push through, to be normal. I tried. For years, I tried. But no one ever told me about the price. Autistic burnout isn't just physical tiredness. It's a silent overload that builds up until your body and mind just shut down. For me, it came in cycles and I didn't even know it had a name. It would start small. Sleeping badly, ignoring phone calls, struggling to get out of bed. Then came the brain fog, the forgetfulness, the irritability with sounds, lights, people. And finally, the total crash. Days where I couldn't react to anything. I just wanted to disappear. And the cruelest part. People would still say, "But you're so articulate. You work, study, hang out. You don't look like anything's wrong." The truth, I barely had the energy to exist. That burnout didn't come from who I am. It came from never letting myself be who I am. From constantly trying to be less sensitive, more social, more productive, more adaptable. It's like wearing shoes that don't fit your whole life, because someone told you they were the only ones you could wear. And one day, you finally look down and realize your feet are bleeding. Now I get it. Burnout isn't weakness. It's my body's way of screaming that the effort to fit in has gone too far. And I'm learning to listen to that scream. To stop. To breathe. To start over. To let go of passing. So I can finally just be. I still wear masks, but less often. I still adapt, but I'm more careful about when and where. And more than anything, I've learned that not looking autistic should never have been the goal. My goal now is to feel whole, even if that makes the world uncomfortable. Looking back at my life and at my parents' lives, I realized the biggest turning point didn't come from a diagnosis. It came from something quieter. Understanding myself was an act of survival, but also of love. For a long time, all I wanted was to fix myself, to stop being weird, to stop making people uncomfortable, to be someone easier to like, easier to be around, easier to keep close. But now was never about fixing, it was about accepting. Little by little, I also began to see my mom differently. For years, I thought she was odd, rigid, set in her ways. But now, I see something else. I see a woman who, without knowing it, spent her life masking, trying to fit in, suffering quietly because no one understood her, not even the people she loved most. A woman with autistic traits, who never had a name for what she felt. Just the constant pressure to be normal. And my dad. Oh, my dad. All my life, he was that quiet man in the corner. Reserved, rigid, solitary, and yet always there. Now I know he, too, is an undiagnosed autistic. And what he needed wasn't judgment, but space to be himself. With his routines, his silences, his unique way of showing love, a love that, even if different, was real. The truth is, my whole family was shaped by unnamed neurodivergence, and only now, as an adult, am I beginning to piece that puzzle together. Not in a rush, not with anger, but with a new kind of gaze. A gaze of reconciliation. Because what we need most isn't to twist ourselves to fit others. It's the courage to truly see ourselves. For me, the path to healing isn't about fixing anymore. It's about embracing myself and my story, with all its pieces out of place. One of my biggest victories so far has been recognizing my neurodivergence as something valid, not as a problem to be solved, but as a different way of functioning. CBT doesn't try to normalize me. It helps me build a life that works with the way I'm wired. And that, to me, is already a huge win. Maybe even, just maybe, that's the most beautiful way to rebuild everything, starting with acceptance. If you've made it all the way here, thank you really. This video is more than anything, an invitation to listen, but also, to speak. If at any moment in my story you thought, that's me, in the doubts, the struggles, the little discoveries, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Share your experience, your suspicions, your search, or even your silence. Here, you'll be heard. No judgment. And if you've always felt like something in your life never quite fit, maybe it's time to look closer. Getting a diagnosis isn't about slapping on a label. It's about understanding. It's about finally giving a name to what you've felt your whole life. And maybe, learning to treat yourself with a little more kindness. If any of this speaks to you, hit subscribe. Turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And most importantly, don't feel alone. There are so many of us out here, and every story told is one more step toward breaking the silence. See you in the next one.